The late 1700s was a time of great upheaval and transformation in the Americas. 13 British colonies along the Atlantic coast were thriving, home to nearly 2 million people. These colonies were part of the vast British Empire, ruled from London by King George III and Parliament. For many years, the colonies had enjoyed relative autonomy, managing much of their own affairs while benefiting from British trade and military protection. However, as the British government tightened its control and imposed taxes, tensions between the colonies and Britain began to escalate, setting the stage for revolution. The seeds of discontent were sown in the aftermath of the French and Indian War, 1754 to 1763, a conflict between Britain and France for control of North America. Although Britain emerged victorious, the war left it with a massive debt. To recover costs, the British government turned to the colonies, introducing a series of taxes and laws that would profoundly strain their relationship. The Stamp Act of 1765 was one of the first measures to anger the colonists. It required them to buy special stamped paper for printed materials, including newspapers, legal documents, and even playing cards. To the colonists, this was more than an economic burden. It was a challenge to their rights. They had no representatives in the British Parliament and believed they should not be taxed without their consent. This sentiment gave rise to the famous slogan, "No taxation without representation." The protests grew louder with the Townshend Acts of 1767, which imposed duties on everyday items like glass, tea, and paper. Resistance turned into action with organized boycotts of British goods. Groups like the Sons of Liberty, led by figures such as Samuel Adams, galvanized public opposition. Women played a crucial role too, forming groups like the Daughters of Liberty to produce homemade goods and support the boycott. The situation reached a boiling point with the Tea Act of 1773. This law gave the struggling British East India Company a monopoly on tea sales in the colonies, undercutting local merchants. For many colonists, it was the last straw. On December 16, 1773, a group of colonists in Boston took dramatic action against British authority. Disguised as Native Americans to conceal their identities, they boarded 3 British ships docked in Boston Harbor and dumped 342 chests of tea, sent by the East India Company, into the water. This bold act of protest became famously known as the Boston Tea Party. The British government was outraged. In retaliation, they passed a series of harsh measures known as the Intolerable Acts. Were a series of 4 punitive laws passed by the British Parliament to punish Massachusetts for the Boston Tea Party. These acts included the Boston Port Act, which closed Boston Harbor, the Massachusetts Government Act, which revoked the colony's self-governance, and the Administration of Justice Act. This act was commonly called the Murder Act by colonists, as they believed it would allow British officers to get away with murdering colonists, and Quartering Act, requiring colonial authorities to provide food, drink, quarters, fuel, and transportation to British forces stationed in their towns or villages. In 1774, representatives from 12 of the 13 colonies gathered in Philadelphia for the First Continental Congress. Leaders like George Washington, John Adams, and Patrick Henry debated how to respond to Britain's actions. They sent a petition to King George III, calling for the repeal of the Intolerable Acts. The situation escalated in April 1775, when British troops marched to Lexington and Concord, Massachusetts, to seize weapons and arrest colonial leaders. Local militia, known as Minutemen, confronted them. Shots were fired, marking the start of the American Revolutionary War. The early days of the war were challenging for the colonies. The British Army was one of the most powerful in the world, with disciplined soldiers, a formidable navy, and abundant resources. By contrast, the colonial forces were made up of farmers, tradesmen, and volunteers, poorly equipped and inexperienced in battle. To unify their efforts, the colonies formed the Continental Army, appointing George Washington as its commander-in-chief. Washington, a veteran of the French and Indian War, brought both military skill and unshakable determination to the role. By issuing the Declaration of Independence on July 4, 1776, the 13 American colonies officially severed their political ties with Great Britain. Adopted by the Second Continental Congress, the Declaration outlined the colonists' motivations for seeking independence and affirmed their right to self-governance. Written primarily by Thomas Jefferson, the Declaration proclaimed that all men are created equal and endowed with unalienable rights, including life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. This bold act transformed the colonies into the United States of America, no longer subjects of the British Crown. The war that followed was grueling, with the British capturing key cities such as New York and Philadelphia. In late 1777, General George Washington chose Valley Forge as the winter encampment for the Continental Army. Valley Forge served as the site of the Continental Army's encampment from December 19, 1777 to June 19, 1778, marking it as the third and harshest of the 8 winter quarters the Army endured during the American Revolutionary War. 3 months before the Valley Forge encampment, in September 1777, the Second Continental Congress was forced to flee Philadelphia after Washington's defeat at the Battle of Brandywine. This loss left Philadelphia vulnerable to a British attack as part of the British Army's Philadelphia campaign, which aimed to capture the city. Unable to defend Philadelphia, Washington led his 12,000-man army to Valley Forge, about 18 miles northwest of the city. At Valley Forge, the Continental Army faced a devastating supply crisis while simultaneously retraining and reorganizing in preparation for future battles. An estimated 1,700 to 2,000 soldiers died from disease, possibly worsened by malnutrition. Despite these hardships, the Continental Army emerged from Valley Forge stronger and more disciplined. This transformation was largely due to the efforts of Baron von Steuben, a Prussian military officer. Von Steuben introduced rigorous drills and military training, instilling discipline and professionalism that would greatly enhance the Army's effectiveness in the battles to come. A major turning point in the Revolutionary War came with the Battle of Saratoga in 1777. This decisive American victory not only lifted patriot morale, but also strengthened the hope for independence and helped secure crucial foreign support. General Benedict Arnold, who played a key role in the victory, was initially hailed as a hero for his bravery on the battlefield. However, his reputation would later be tarnished by his infamous betrayal and defection to the British. The American victory at Saratoga, also the outcome, convinced King Louis XVI of France that the American cause was viable, leading to a formal alliance France to enter the war as an ally, providing essential soldiers, supplies, and naval support. Spain and the Netherlands followed suit, joining the conflict and turning it into a global war. This expanded the conflict and stretched British resources thin, significantly altering the course of the war. The war reached its climax in 1781 at the Battle of Yorktown. Washington's army, supported by French troops under the Marquis de Lafayette, surrounded British General Cornwallis in Virginia. The French Navy cut off any chance of escape by sea. After weeks of siege, Cornwallis surrendered, effectively ending major combat in the war. The war formally ended with the Treaty of Paris in 1783. Britain recognized the independence of the United States, and the 13 colonies were free to govern themselves. The American Revolution was not just a war for independence. It was a profound moment in world history. It demonstrated that ordinary people could rise up against a powerful empire and fight for self-determination. The ideals of democracy and liberty enshrined in the Declaration of Independence inspired future movements, from the French Revolution to struggles for freedom around the globe. The United States faced many challenges as a new nation, including economic struggles, internal divisions, and the question of how to live up to the ideals of equality and liberty. Yet, the revolution remains a powerful symbol of hope, courage, and the enduring belief that people have the right to shape their own destiny. This is the story of how a group of determined colonists defied the odds, took on one of the world's greatest powers, and forever changed the course of history.